Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, boys and girls. So today's lab is about NTP. We're going to configure a couple of servers, in this case, two routers and a server, a syslog server. And this is basically the topology that we will be working on. So let's start with the first part of this lab. I'm going to open the packet tracer that I will share with you, boys and girls, later on. I need to do um, the initial lab and the completed lab. This will be the initial lab. Let me just work on it. Initial lab. And I have to do the completed version as well. Completed. Completed. So give me just a moment. Let me just validate that I am working in the completed version here. Okay, let me work on this completed version. Yeah, let me just work on it. So hopefully I will get it in a moment. Let me see. What is the list here? Completed one. Yeah, there you go. First thing we do, we have to configure the server. The server. So let's go ahead and configure it as best as possible. We have to do some updates here. We open up the server. We go to services, syslog, turn on the service. Then the NTP, we have to turn this on. This is certificate for the password. And the key is 777 and enable the service. What else? What else do we need to do? Okay, we have to close this, open it again. Okay, it's actually the desktop. Let's go to the desktop and we configure the IP address. Let's validate we have the right IP address. 172.16.2.3/24 255.255.255.0. Okay, we already configured the key, the password. We activated NTP and syslog. And this is the default gateway, 172.16.2.1. Okay, perfect. That's the first step. The first step is to configure the server. Let's validate this is actually turned on. Yeah, perfect. Okay, so let's go ahead and work on the configuration of these devices. I'm going to go ahead and just remove the spaces just to cover my back because we're going to configure this guy, the router one, R1. So give me just a moment to remove those spaces and save the configuration. Let me just copy this and let's go to router one. It's actually the NTP server. Let's validate that we are talking about the NTP server here. What is the host name? It just says R1. R1 should be the NTP server. Let me just double check on this. Let me double check. This is R1 or 2. Yeah, it's the NTP server. So let me just copy and paste this, config T. Config T. And let me paste this configuration to WR. And that's it. Let's go with the next one. I have to open up the script for router 2. Of course, I will share this information with you. So you will have access to this template in order to add it to the different equipment. This one is actually the client. We have a server and a client. So let's validate that. The client, yeah, NTP client. Let me save this configuration and let me just add it there. We're going to analyze what we are configuring. Let's go to R2 and let me just paste it there. Enable config T and let's just paste it there. And let's do 2WR to save the configuration. So before we check that the interfaces are turned on and everything is plugged together correctly, we are still missing the serial interfaces. Yeah, maybe there is something wrong about those serial interfaces that I don't see them configure. Let's go ahead and validate something here. When we were adding the configuration, we added the NTP configuration, the service timestamp, the login information, synchronous, the password, everything. Okay, yeah. We might be missing some information here for R2. Let me just copy and paste the whole configuration again. Let me just save it. Now, I think there might be something wrong with the gigabit interface because those serial interfaces, I don't see them available. So let me just work on this for a moment. I want to validate something. Config T. Maybe one of these interfaces is not gigabit. It's actually a serial interface. So let me see. Yeah, it looks like this /30. This has to be the serial 000. So let me just power this up. Let me remove this and paste it there. Is 255.255.252. Let's turn on these interfaces. We are in NTP client in R2. Okay, so we don't need this for now. That's it. Let me just save this, and that's pretty much what we needed to do. I just needed to configure a specific IP address for these serial interfaces. Let me just do a WR to save the configuration, and the same thing, we have to do it for this guy. Okay. Okay, let me work on it. That gigabit 01, 01, yeah, that doesn't seem correct. There's something wrong here. We may have to figure this out. Let me remove this for now. Let me remove it for now, and let's configure this one here. Let's do a 9600 clock rate. Then that's 0.0.1 if I'm not mistaken. I'm going to validate that in a moment. 252. Okay, let's run this one. I want to validate that gigabit 00. Gigabit 1. Yeah, it looks like those serial interfaces are correct. It's 1 actually. So let me correct that. So it's actually 10, the 1, the 1, the 1, and that's it. Okay, this doesn't seem correct. This is actually the one that has to be connected to the LAN. So let me correct that. Okay, this is gigabit 00. Okay, let's turn this one on. It's overlapping this one, so let's just delete that and paste it here. Is 255.255.0/24. There you go. Now it's making more sense. This one doesn't have to, it doesn't need anything. What about this one? This one doesn't need to be created. We don't need this one. We can just remove it from the NTP. No, from the NTP server. This one actually, we need it. We need this one. We need to remove that one from the NTP server. So let's just keep this on. Let's validate something here. Are we able to ping? Yeah, perfect. So let me fix this. Yeah, it looks great. Let me delete this because we don't need this for now. Let me work on that serial. Apparently it's not turned on. Okay, perfect. Now let me save this. And now what we have done is pretty much with the graphical assistance, we have configured all of these. Let's see if we have connectivity from the router to the other router. And yes, we do. And if we have connectivity from the server to the default gateway of the router. Perfect. Okay, great. Now, we're going to do the following. We're going to validate with some status commands if we are getting NTPs or syslogs messages information. So let's go to the guide. We already configured this, pretty much everything. Let's see if we have OSPF configured this in this topology. Let me do, yeah, look at that. Looks like we might be able to reach the server. Yeah, great. Amazing work. So we have pretty much everything running in place. If we want to validate OSPF, remember the command show IP protocol. That was the command. And you can see OSPF is successfully running. Now, this network has to be configured in OSPF for this router, but we don't need it for this one, so we can remove it for now. Let me validate the OSPF configuration, show IP protocol. Okay, config T, router OSPF1, no network, 172.16, and to that 0, then we have 00 dot, let's see, it's 255 area 0. Great. Let's do a 2WR and let's validate again, IP protocols. Okay, we might be running a little faster, but it's just that we wanted to have full connectivity between the servers, NTP server, the client, and the Syslog server. Now, the moment of the truth. We have pretty much configured everything, but we have to do some testing. We already configured everything when we run the script. Okay, we have to validate some information in router 2. It's actually the client, if you guys remember, the NTP client. So the first command we have to execute is show NTP associations. And look at that. Amazing. We have some information coming up regarding the NTP associations. We have the address, the clock, the ST, the pool, the reachability, the delay. That's pretty much what we have. Another command with useful information will be show NTP status. We can run that one as well. The clock range is extracted too. It is synchronized to the server. We have the valid information as well regarding this update. And finally, generate some events shutting down interfaces for the Syslog server. Let's see if we have already events in the Syslog server. Let's see. Syslog. Oh, okay, we already have some events. Take a look at that. So this one is about some configuration for the console port. And look at that. Amazing. Okay, the serial interfaces and the OSPF adjacency, the app status. Okay, in the serial 000. Okay, maybe we can do, let's go ahead and do a little test here. Let's go ahead and power up some interfaces. So config T, do show IP interface brief. Okay, interface serial 000, shoot, no shoot. Okay, exit, interface gigabit 00, shoot, no shoot. Okay, great. Now, let's do the same for router 1. Let's do config T, interface serial 000, shoot, and then no shoot. Let's do a WR here. Let's do another WR there. Let's validate the NTP server to see what information we got now in the Syslogs events. Look at that. We have more information coming up. After some informations, we have the link serial 000 in one of the devices that is actually coming down. Okay. And this is the 172.16.2.1 device. That is actually R2. And that's pretty much where we are getting most of the updates. So I'm trying to see if maybe there is something regarding the other one, but I see pretty much all the information on R2. Now, pretty much everything is for R2. I don't see many logs found for R1. So maybe most of the information are configured with the client, with the NTP client, with the R2 router, because I don't see many logs regarding information for the other router, R1. So most of the information that we are receiving is from the client when we were doing the updates. Now, what did we configure in these devices? That's important because we We just run the script and that's it. Let's go ahead over the configuration that we added to the different equipments. So basically, the first thing we do is configure the basic configurations in the routers, some security, some encryption, some passwords commands, and then we added OSPF. Now, this network only needed to be configured in R2. So R1, we can disregard this. We already deleted that. That's pretty much everything that we have to do for now. So let me just erase it for here. Okay, clear the drawings. Okay, then we have the addition to the server with the key, the password, the NTP servers, um, the IP address for the server, and we enable the syslog service here. Okay, what else? We configure a key authentication key, MD5. Now, if you guys remember, we can maybe add another higher authentication than MD5. But for now, this is the one that we have available in Packet Tracer. Okay, the trusted key, the update calendar, the timestamp command for microseconds, the login of the host, and the login trap informational. What else did we configure? Because I'm not seeing so much of the configuration that we have for R1. Let's take a look at the server, NTP server, and let's see what all we were configuring in R1. Show run, basically the OSPF, as I was telling you, the clock rate information. Let's see if there's some regarding the NTP services for this one. I don't see much of the NTP services for this one, boys and girls. Let's take a look at the script. So this is what we configure in R2. Pretty much all the authentication services, the service timestamp, the login, the trap. This is actually the informational. If you remember, it was type 6 for the emergency alert. And pretty much we didn't configure these services in R1. Most of these services that we configure for NTP, they were in R2, R2. So we were dealing with R2 only. Now, I'm wondering if we can add the configuration to the NTP configuration to the NTP server. So let me see if I can validate that. Let me just go ahead and validate on it and make the question. Can we add NTP, an NTP configuration in R1, the NTP server, an NTP configuration, and we run an NTP, yes, an NTP configuration in R1, which in this case is the NTP server. There is an optional configuration, and NTP master 5 is that we needed to add this. So let me see if I can work on it. So let's do a config T, NTP master 5. Okay, let's go ahead and configure something in the client here. Let's validate if we can do NTP server 10.1.1.1 or once here. And then we have NTP update calendar. Okay, this is the configuration that we hadn't added to R1. So let me work on it right now. And maybe I can add it here so you can have it there handy. Let's see, let's see. Okay, so maybe if we configure this and we do the test, we might be able to get some information regarding this R1 device. So let me just copy this in R1. It's actually the server. Let's do a 2WR. And let's do the following. So it's actually easier. Let's bounce the interfaces. So let me go ahead and bounce these interfaces, or power off the interface, shut down the interface, and then power back on the interface. Let me do the same this for this one. Okay, I shut down the interface, put it back on. Okay, I just power on that one. What about 00? Power off, turn on. Okay, now let's validate to see if there are more logs information for the NTP. That is what we configured before, the syslogs. I want to see if there is information regarding R1. I don't see much. Most of the information is only coming from R2. We still added the configuration, but we don't see much of the syslogs information is still for R2. So let's just validate something else. We hadn't completed the show commands for this R1, only in R2. So let me see if we collect some information from R1 after doing all of these changes. And let's do a show NTP status. And there you have it. There you have the information. You have the stratum 10, you have the synchronized information, and the reference is 127.27.1.1. Okay, this is basically the system pool interval, 5 seconds. It was updated 31 seconds ago. NTP status, what was the other one? With question mark, we can see that it's actually showing TP associations. And look at that. Look at that. Let's see if we are able to see some logs here. Let's see, show. Let me see if we are able to see some logging information. Show logging. Let's validate that. Show logging. And there is not much about that one. Let's see if we can see some updates in R2 for the login information here. Let's see, show logging here. And it's not much what we can see. Most of the information of the logs, we are not able to see it in the routers. However, when we were working in the server and we configured the server successfully, we were actually able to see those login information coming from router 2 most of the time. Let's see what else are we missing. Okay, yes, I think we are pretty much done with the lab. We are not missing anything here. We shut down the interfaces, we validated the logins, we validated the structure. So the first thing we do was configuring the interfaces, adding OSPF, validating all the connectivity. Then we added some information to the configuration of the server, and we were able to successfully configure authentication in both router 1 and router 2, but it was mainly mandatory to configure that one in router 2. Router 1 was not mandatory per se. And finally, in router 2, the last thing that we were adding was the service timestamps, the login to the server, and the login trap information. And that's pretty much everything that we have to cover for today, for this lab. Now, I am wondering if I can fix the scripts because as you guys can remember, there was some errors in the scripts. For example, this has to be serial 000, and this has to be clock rate 9600. So I'm going to fix this right now. This doesn't have to be configured at all. So let me just remove this one, and you don't encounter this problem later. Okay, this one, we didn't have to configure anything. Pretty much stay there. Nothing has to be configured here. Let me just remove it because we don't really need it. So let's save that. Let me open the router 2. And this is actually serial 000 interfaces. Not shut down. This one is actually 00, gigabit 00. This is the one that connects to the server, from the router to the server. But I think this is the default gateway, but we need it here. And that's pretty much. Let's validate that. Let me just validate what is the IP address in the client. Show IP interface brief. And yes, it's 2.1, 172.16.2.1. Yeah, so that's pretty much what we needed to fix on these scripts. So right now, when you guys run the lab, if you don't see this information at the end of the lab, it's because I already fixed it for you. So you don't have to start deleting commands and adding those commands as well. So you can just see the most of the lab successfully running. And that's pretty much everything that we have to cover today. I'm thinking if you're missing something, but I think we are able to finally validate everything that we have covered in this class. So let me just highlight these events. We configure the basic settings for the routers, the OSPF protocols, the NTP, and the syslog with authentication. We were able to configure the routers to use NTP and syslog in the server. And that's pretty much everything that we have for today's class. So remember, practice makes perfect. I will see you at the top of success. And remember to practice as much as you can to become a network expert. So until next time, and take care, boys and girls. It's been a pleasure to work with you today in this amazing lab with a great learning experience. Let me just clear the board. Let me just clear the board. Okay, that's it. Take care.